today's class, I decided we did many classes on women and prayer. The theme of this lecture series is women in Judaism, and we spent a long time on aspects of prayer. We covered everything from minyan and talis, tefillin, and women's prayer groups, and we did a lot of material on that. I think we're closing the book on that chapter for now. If we want, we can revisit some later. That will depend on everyone's feelings. So we're going to start a new topic this week, the topic of tznius or tzniut. And I'm using the Hebrew word because typically tzniut is translated as modesty, which is not quite accurate. But that's the area of discussion we're going to start on, the topic of modesty. I'm going to go back to using the word tznius instead of modesty, because again, it's not an accurate translation, and I will explain what it does mean in a little bit. So my goal is to start out looking at the philosophical foundations of this concept, and discuss where we get this idea, what it means in Judaism, the idea of modesty, tznius, and then look at the more practical details of laws and how it applies in a practical way to our lives. So let's begin with discussing very, very briefly some of the misconceptions about modesty in Judaism. I like to start there because there are some basic misconceptions, and I think that'll be a nice way to enter us and provide entry into the topic of what does it really mean. So the first misconception about it is that, as I said earlier, that tznius is defined as modesty. It's not really, it's not just modesty. The whole idea, when you say modesty in Judaism, modesty in general, it has very negative connotations, it's a negative vibe. The assumption is it's all about restrictions, what I can't do, what I can't wear. And in fact, it's a very positive attribute. The midah, the trait of tznius is a positive one, and it isn't completely about restricting what we're allowed to wear, what we're not allowed to wear. It's a trait that's actually very closely connected to the idea of holiness and God Himself, as we're going to see. So the real definition of tznius is a combination, really, of terms. It's a combination of privacy, hiddenness, internality, and modesty all together. And that's really what modesty... What did I say? Internality. An inner dimension to one's existence. The inner dimension, the hiddenness of one's character, one's personality, of life itself, of the world in which we live, and that's really what tznius means. We're going to see how that plays out. So it's really not just a topic that has to do with how long my sleeves can be. Okay. The second misconception about this idea is that it's all about women. What women can wear and what women can't wear, and how women should act and how women shouldn't act. It's sexist. It's focused on us. And in fact, it's not. In fact, it's a trait that both men and women are supposed to strive for. It's a personality trait that both men and women are supposed to practice. Okay? And it's also, the idea of it being focused on women comes with the idea that it's sexist because it's limiting to women. And in fact, what we're going to see is that tznius, instead of repressing women, actually is the opposite of objectifying women and objectifying the body. Okay. The third misconception is, and this is a little bit connected to what I just said, third misconception is it's an expression of the shamefulness of the body. If I have to hide my body, that means there must be something wrong with it. So it's an expression of the denigration of my body. It's about repression. It's about repressing who I really am. And then also, in addition to that, it's about, as a corollary, it's about helping men save themselves from their worst worser impulses. That I've got to help a man from, I have to prevent him from sinning, therefore I have to cover myself up, I have to be ashamed of who I am. And that doesn't really, sit well in this culture of, if you've got it, flaunt it. I should be proud of myself. I should be, how many times have we heard starlets say, I'm proud of my sexuality. So it seems like the idea of modesty is, very much the antithesis of that pride that seems to be a healthy way of expressing oneself in this culture. Okay, and again, we're going to see that that's not the case. It's not about, again, shaming the body. It's not about hiding the body because there's something denigrating about our bodies. It's about, as I said earlier, not objectifying the body, not making the physicality, one's physicality, an end in itself. All right. And the fourth and final misconception about modesty, tznius, is that it's all about how we dress. Long sleeves and longer skirts, and that's it. And with hair covering for women. It's about an all-encompassing way of life. It's about how we think, about how we speak, about how we act. It really covers about how a person is supposed to comport themselves in the world. We're going to see that. It's one closes one facet of that, but it's actually, as I said, an inherent positive value that really encompasses everything. Okay? Any questions so far? All right. Now, we're going to start our philosophical foundations of tznius by going right back to the very beginning. We have to look at the first story in the Torah, which is the story of Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden, the Gan Eden. We learned so much from them. We've talked about that situation many times before in this class. And once again, we're going to see what the story of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden has to teach us about this topic. Because we're going to see that the first concepts of a person's self-image and a person's body and what they do with it, how how they dress it or not dress it, our first ideas of all of these things come from the first people on earth, Adam and Chava. Okay, so before the sin, right? Before their sin, they're in the Garden of Eden. Hashem has created them, separated man and woman. Now they're naked, right? They're not wearing any clothes. And the pasuk says, the verse says, they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. Okay, so it makes a point of telling us that they were not ashamed of their nakedness, and we know later on I'm going to go further, but we know that later on, once they were naked, once they were sinned, they felt the need to cover up. Right. So the question is, was the act of being naked a sin or wasn't it? Okay, if it was sinful, why would God allow them in the beginning, in the first place, to walk around without clothes on? And if it isn't sinful, then what happened during the sin to change their attitude about it? What made it bad later on? Right? So there must be something different between the two states of being before the sin and post-sin. What happened in the beginning? Why was it different? Okay. So we have discussed before that Adam and Chava, when they were created with an evil inclination outside of themselves. Today we know we struggle with our inner Yetzer Hara, as we call it, the evil inclination. It's the little devil inside us that tells us to do wrong, pulls us away from what we know is the right thing to do. But when they were created, Adam and Chava had the evil inclination was not an internal element. It was an external reality. It was sort of like a philosophical issue. It was not in themselves pulling and really being in conflict with their better selves. It was an outside, and it was represented by the snake who tempted Chava to sin. But it wasn't internal. It was external, right? So the body representing the physical pull, the physical desires, the physicality of what I want to do, how I want to use my body, that was in service of God, in service of the soul. So you had the soul created inside, and then God took the body, and the body was meant as a tailor-made garment covering up the soul. But they both had one function to serve God. So the body was in service of the soul, and it was in unity of the soul, right? So the purpose of the body was to serve the function of the soul. This idea of the oneness of the body and soul would reflect and imitate God's oneness. Okay, that was the idea. That was what God wanted, that our unity of body and soul would imitate his oneness. So therefore, when Adam and Chava looked at each other, when they looked at their bodies, they saw something, a physicality, but it was a physicality that was, whose purpose was completely spiritual. So in other words, when they looked at a hand, they didn't see a hand. They saw an object, a tool that could do mitzvos, that could give charity, that could, that could do good deeds. Okay, when they looked at their mouths, they saw an instrument for tefillah, for prayer, for praising God. They saw an instrument for, saying nice things to other people. Each body part that they looked at was viewed with its purpose, its spiritual purpose in mind. So that when Adam and Chava looked at each other's private parts, their reproductive organs, they again were not seeing anything shameful. They weren't seeing anything that was a physical element unto itself. They saw again an organ whose purpose was spiritual ends, the goals of the soul. So for example, the mitzvah of multiplying, being fruitful and multiplying, that's a mitzvah connected to the reproductive organs, and that's all they saw, okay? So with every organ, they could fulfill God's will. Therefore, no organ was shameful. It wasn't shameful to view any part of the body, and nothing needed to be covered, okay? So man in his ideal state viewed all his physical resources as a means of serving God. Therefore, outer and inner was seen as an inseparable unit. Okay. Originally, God wanted us to be able to enjoy this life in such a way where our physicality wouldn't stand in the way of our spiritual goals, of defining ourselves internally. So he gave Adam and Chava the gift of seeing each other in their totality. So when Adam looked at Chava, he saw mind, body, spirit, and heart all in one view. Okay. They had a clear perception of the soul as the true identity. They weren't confused by seeing, just a body. They saw the soul. They saw the essence of the person. Therefore, there was no shame. Shame, what is shame? Shame is really the realization of a disconnect between what is and what should be, right? If I'm shameful about something, if I'm ashamed of something, it's because I realize I'm not doing something the way I should be doing it, right? So there was no sense of this because there was complete unity between physical and spiritual realms. Therefore, there was no shame, right? Okay. So they didn't have that disconnect. Now, when they sinned, what happened? What changed? Do you mind if I have a bottle of water, please? Oh. Thank you.
Here, you want to go on?
No, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you. When they sinned, the pasuk then says, the verse now says, and their eyes were opened, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves, etc., and then God made clothes for them. So question Rashi, who's the primary commentator on the Torah, asks, right, the commentators all ask, what do you mean, now they knew they were naked? Rashi says, even a blind man knows that he's naked, recognizes that it's a simple fact of life. I'm wearing clothes, I'm not wearing clothes. So what does that mean, now they knew? When they indulged their physical drives, what happened? This was at odds with their spiritual mission. The result was, as we know, that they internalized the evil inclination, right? It had been outside themselves, and now it was internalized. Okay. When they did that, yes?
You mean by eating?
Huh?
With the eating?
With the eating of the fruit, yes. When they did the sin of eating, and Chava's additional sin was making her husband eat, okay, that was an expression of their physical desires. Chava making her husband eat the fruit was a the cause of that, the reason she did that is because she realized that once she now became mortal because she ate the forbidden fruit, she realized that if she died, Adam would keep on living. And she didn't want him to go look for another mate after she died, because he's still immortal, remember. So the point is that she wanted to make him as mortal as she is. Right? That was a purely jealous, purely physical desire on her part. She didn't want him to have a second mate after her. So she forced him to eat. Once they sinned, they internalized the evil inclination. Okay?
But why would they have had this desire if everything was all for the purpose of?
So because there was an evil inclination. In the story of Adam and Chava, it took the form of the snake, who convinced Chava. And it's a little more complicated than that. Adam made the mistake of telling his wife, of adding to Hashem's commandment. Hashem's command was, don't eat the fruit of this tree. And Adam added to that and said, oh, God also said, don't touch the tree. If you touch the tree, you'll die. That was his own addition. So therefore, the snake, again, who embodied the evil inclination, in his seduction of Eve and his convincing her to do evil, convinced her by having her push herself up against the tree. Once she touched it, she saw she didn't die. Therefore, there was no evil inclination inside of her, but it still existed. The pull of this particular sin was, I guess, so great that it overwhelmed their sense of what's right and what's wrong. God still gave them free choice. So that's...
So in order to give them free choice, you have to give them some desire to do what the soul wouldn't want.
Correct, but it wasn't as much an inner part of themselves as it is for us today. So they had a clearer vision. They had a clearer vision of right and wrong, and they had a clearer vision that, today, the alarm rings, and your body says, oh, just 10 more minutes, and your neshama says, get up and daven, and your body says 10 more. There's this conflict between the two. The body and the soul aren't constantly in conflict. I want to eat this chocolate cake. My soul says it's not good for your health, your spiritual and your physical health. Whatever, even though I'm not tempted by chocolate cake that much. But, whatever it is, there is a constant pull in us between the soul and the physical, the spiritual and the physical. For them, it wasn't such an internal fight as it is for us. So they did have free choice, and they understood God wants this, God doesn't want this. It was easier for them to acknowledge this is the right way. It was easier for them to look at a hand and see the spiritual essence of that hand. But there was still free choice, which obviously resulted in the sin. Okay, so again, when they sinned, they created this division between the physical and the spiritual spheres, right? The body no longer was in service of the soul. It was in conflict with it. As I said, the alarm clock rings at 7 in the morning. We know today your body is screaming just 10 more minutes, and your soul says, no, get up, it's time to go to shul, The body, right? The body wants this, and the soul wants this, right? We're constantly in conflict with our neshamas. So the body, what they did was they created this entity, the body, the physicality became an identity in itself, whereas before it had been subjugated to the soul. The soul was the master of the body, and now with the sin, it was no longer the master. Now the body assumed a glory of its own. It became independent of the soul. Now it could be used as an end in itself instead of simply always in service to the soul. Right? So the soul was obscured. So now what they did when they looked at each other after the sin, they now obscured their vision of the soul. They had this vision of the unity. As I said, they looked at a hand, they could see the spiritual essence of that hand. Once they sinned, they destroyed that unity of vision, and they noticed only the physical. Okay? So now, this is why after the sin, they suddenly saw their nakedness. They separated the physical from the spiritual, and they were only seeing the physical. Now, again, they had been naked before, but the nakedness, it didn't take on a life of its own. It was, again, married to the spiritual element, essences of themselves, and it wasn't in conflict with it. Now, suddenly, the body, the physicality, became an element in itself, in its own right. Therefore, they destroyed that ability to see the totality of their mates. Okay? That's where clothing comes in. So now, why do they need clothing now? Because they had to de-emphasize the physical in order to re-emphasize the spiritual. So now if I'm only seeing a physical being, I don't see any spirituality there, because the body has its own existence. So now I've got to cover the body, not because I'm ashamed of the body, but because I want to re-establish, remind myself of the soul's existence and the soul's, special, the soul's spiritual essence. I want to get that back. So I'm going to de-emphasize, I'm going to cover up the physicality in order to re-emphasize the spiritual, right? So that the body won't dominate, because now the soul is obviously not something we can see. It's not a physical essence. It's not a visual, solid object I can see. So if I'm looking at you and all I see is the physical, there's no recollection of that soul, that essential being of you that's inside. But if I cover the body, then I have more of a chance of allowing the spiritual to get through the body and to come to the surface, right? Okay, so that's what the idea was in hiding the body, to reassert and remind themselves of their true essence, the soul. Okay, it redirects the focus back to your neshama, right? This is why clothing, it's very interesting, I don't remember who points out, the word for clothing in Hebrew is lavush. And someone interpreted that, it could be interpreted to mean low bush, lavush, low bush, bush meaning busha, shame. Now we don't have shame. Because again, remember that shame is when there's a disconnect between what should be my ideal state and what is. So now with clothing, I am closer to that ideal state of allowing my soul to come through and sort of to sort of underplay the dominance that my body has in this physical world. Okay. Now, as a result of the sin, you had a question? Okay. Isn't it nice? It's really fascinating, really fascinating. As a result of the sin, man treats his physical needs and pleasures as a realm unto himself. Originally, they weren't. And this is the idea that there are despiritualized zones of existence, that somehow my physical needs are over here and my spiritual needs are over here, or my physical tasks over here, my spiritual tasks over here. That's an illusion. It's not the case that there are despiritualized zones in life. Because we know that every aspect of our lives is touched by the holy. And our job in this world, as we've discussed before, our job in this world is to remarry the spiritual and the physical. And that's where a mitzvah, the commandments, come in. The Torah comes in to help us reestablish that unity between the soul and the body in this world that we lost through sinning. Okay? So we try to reunite them. And again, we've talked many times about how we do this in the physical realm with eating, right? The mitzvahs that all relate to putting food in our mouths and nourishing ourselves. We have tons of mitzvahs about laws of kashrus, right? Brachos before we eat, brachos after we eat, even toiveling pots and pans and koshering things, and all of that is a way of elevating the physical to a spiritual level, or bringing the spiritual down into our quote-unquote mundane actions. So then what we're doing is unifying the spiritual and the physical. Same thing with our sexual needs. Right? The mitzvahs of mikvah is our way of spiritualizing the very physical need, physical desire, almost animal, you could describe it as an animalistic sort of basic human need of cohabiting. And so mikvah is a way of elevating that, marrying it to the spiritual element by literally bringing God into your bed, okay, in a wonderful way, in a holy way. We don't believe in this idea that a person has to live in a hovel in order to be a good person, right? We believe we are put on this earth in order to enjoy life. Think about the holiest day of the week, Shabbos. Is really the holiest Yom Tov that we have, Shabbos, right? How do we celebrate it? Now you'd think it's the holiest day of the week, therefore what should be very ascetic about it, right? But how do we celebrate it? With a beautiful white tablecloth, our best china, our finest silverware. We bring out the most gorgeous candelabra. We have the most lavish foods. I mean, we have I often think about the hubbub and the ado that all of the non-Jewish people make about Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners and holiday dinners. It's like 3 times a year they go crazy making, and we do that every single week. We do that every single. We make challah, we make soup, we make filter fish, we make beautiful dishes. This is on a weekly basis. And so how are we elevating Shabbos? We're elevating Shabbos through the physical. We are celebrating Shabbos with beautiful physical things, dishes and foods. We're treating ourselves to extra physical enjoyments as well as spiritual enjoyments. Of course, that's an element of Shabbos. But we're napping on Shabbos, right? Of all the days of the week, of all the Yom Tovim, you would think that on Shabbos, Hashem would say, don't sleep in the daytime. You have to use it for only holy purposes. But that becomes a holy purpose because we're enjoying it on Shabbos. That's the point, right? So some societies have stressed the physical. Think back to ancient Greece where they idolized the human form as the physical human form as the essence of beauty, the pinnacle of beauty. And then there are the opposite. There's some societies that say it's only the spiritual we should be focusing on, right? We should be ascetic about it. The highest level of being a good Christian is being a priest, or at least in the Catholic religion. Renouncing the physical needs and desires of marriage and giving it all up and, marrying their savior, as it were, a nun or a monk or a priest. The ideal is, and the philosophy is that the ideal is renouncing the physical. We don't have any of that idea in Judaism. Our idea is that we want to marry the physical and the spiritual. And that's what we do. So the mitzvah, if a mitzvah enables us to do that, to reunite the spiritual and the physical, the laws of modesty, again, mitzvah, right, also work at rebalancing the body and the soul. Okay, they help us do that by helping us project a proper image to the world. And I'll discuss that a little bit further on. So again, originally the body was in service to the soul. God made them partners in that way. Now the body has its own validity. We have to declare through the mitzvahs, particularly through the laws of Tznius, that my soul is the senior partner in this partnership between my body and my soul. My soul is a senior partner. And the laws of Tznius help us do that. How? First of all, because the laws of Tznius are about dressing in a dignified way, in a royal way. So you are, first of all, reminding yourself that I'm not just a body, I'm not just an animal. There's a holiness to me. I find it very interesting that in almost every single culture in the world, even tribal cultures, there's some idea of dress. Even if it's a loincloth, there's some idea of dress, and some recognition we're not just animals. There's some spark in us. Call it what you will, divine spark, godly spark or just something other than our bodies. And there's a recognition that we have to have a dignity, a certain dignity level of recognition of ourselves as something holy. I think that's interesting. Okay. Because, and again, I think this is a universal idea, that we're not just physical beings. There's something internal about us and eternal about us that we all recognize. We're not just simply, physical creatures. Think about how we eulogize a person after 120 years. We recognize that the essence of a person is not what they look like. The essence of a person, what we get up and say after, again, in a eulogy, is, we don't say, oh, he was really tall. Oh, he had gorgeous white teeth. Oh, he had the blondest hair I've ever seen. We don't say anything about the person physically, really nothing. And that's because I think we recognize, what do we say? We say he was a kind person. He was a generous person. He was a Talmid Chacham. He learned a lot of Torah. We say things about the person that reveals their spiritual essences. And, and that's what Tznius is. It's the commitment to allow us to define ourselves spiritually and also to look at others in a non-superficial and non-external way. So getting back to what I said in the beginning, it's the antithesis. Tznius is the antithesis of objectification, right? It's the realization that my true worth comes from within and from our actions, right? From thoughts, from actions, from speech. And therefore, when I'm able to see a person's inner essence, that's how I want to relate to somebody, and that's how I want to project myself as well, right? So Tznius asks you to project internality. If I want to define myself based on my essence, then covering my body up is going to be the first step in my ability to project that. In other words, when a person dresses in a way that flaunts the body, or that exposes the body, or that says, look at me, look at my physical, whether it's beauty or my clothes, or look at me, when it's someone is screaming for attention to the physical, it's going to be harder to identify that essence, that internal spiritual essence. And so the idea of Tznius is to draw a focus to that essence. Right? It means knowing and communicating to others that I know that what's important about me is my inner self, my soul. Okay, so the outside layers have to become an expression of the inner soul. Okay, and really, the truth is, you can look in life, and on a practical level, we do see that this is true. That people use clothing in daily lives, Jewish, non-Jewish, to express themselves, who they are. Right? How you cover your body is basically a fundamental way of telling people this is who I am. A lawyer would never, for example, walk into court in a t-shirt and shorts. They will always wear a suit, because the suit sends a message. It sends a message of a sober, serious-minded person. In a similar way, a woman in an office environment will also not come into work in shorts and a t-shirt. She will also be dressed in a suit. And it's an interesting fact that in that situation, she would feel a need to dress a certain way that we might call appropriate in a business setting. Because again, she wants to project an image. Okay, same thing with a teenager who wears a nose ring, and has a tattoo on their face. There's a message that person is sending based on the externals. The message is, this is who I am. I belong in this group, and I want you to recognize that about me. So, there was a very interesting idea about, I don't know if it was true or not, about President Bush, that he didn't allow anybody into the Oval Office without a jacket. I don't know if you've heard this. He didn't allow anybody into the Oval Office who wasn't wearing a jacket. And I don't know if it's true or not. It was something that was said about him. I think it's an interesting, another little interesting idea connected to this, which is that the office, the very place of the Oval Office, demanded a certain dignity, a certain way of dressing that communicated respect, not for him, but for the position, for the setting. That the setting was somehow a holy setting in a secular way, a special setting, and that people going in had to internalize that by what they wore. It's a very interesting idea because it's also we also see that in the school uniforms. They're the same idea. That this idea that what you wear not only projects an image, but it also internalizes an idea in your own head, right? So the school uniform is a similar idea where not only do the students have to, the school want the students to project an image of, decently dressed, serious students, but they also want the students to internalize the dress and to recognize that when they're dressed in this uniform, it means they're now in a special place, that they have a special job, and that they're important in that role. I think it's interesting. There's a book called How to Marry Rich, and the book recommends that a woman who wants to find a rich husband should go to a fancy upscale clothing store and try on the most expensive clothing items and just walk around in them for a few minutes. You don't have to buy them, just walk around in them for a few minutes, because the idea is, the book elaborates, says, you're going to feel, it's going to make you feel rich. When you put on something rich, it's going to make you feel rich. So walking around in this really expensive, luxurious outfit, you're going to internalize that message. You're going to actually feel like you deserve somebody rich. That was the idea, So there's this idea that what we wear becomes a part of us. There was another story of a student who was taking an important test. I don't know if it was the bar exam or like a graduate level exam, and she dressed up in a suit, and she could have come in jeans and a t-shirt. She dressed up in a suit and a tie and high heels, and she really looked the part of an executive. And the idea was that dressing that part would make her feel more confident. So there's definitely a connection between what we wear and our own self-image. Okay. Therefore, Tznius also does this. It helps us internalize this message of I am a person. My body is a dignified tool. It's something that's not just, I'm not just an animal. I am my soul, and I have to reflect that in the way I dress, and that also that it will internalize, or hopefully internalize, that message as well. Okay, so therefore, how does Tznius again allow us to do this? By focusing on the internals. If I'm dressing to expose my body, then the first way you're going to communicate with me is through my body, right? It allows a person to bring their soul to the surface before, if you come to me and you're dressed to the hilt, tons of makeup, jewelry's jingling and jangling, and heels, and you're just, you're presenting yourself I'm not saying there's anything wrong with either of those elements, but a person who dresses in a way that screams, look at me, well, I'm going to look at them. And if that's what they want me to do, to notice their externals, right, then that's what I'm noticing first. I'm noticing their externals. I'm noticing their beautiful earrings and their lovely color lipstick and their wonderful outfit, that they got on sale at wherever, whatever. So again, this is not to say that one shouldn't dress well. All right, we'll discuss that later on when we talk about laws. But when someone is presenting their body in a way where they clearly want to be noticed first in the physical realm, then that's what people will notice in the physical realm. And they're obscuring, right? On the other hand, if a person is dressed modestly or tznius, in a way that's dignified and not screaming, look at me, so then I have to look at them, and I'm not noticing the physical, so I've got to look a little bit deeper. They're much more able to present themselves, their inner selves, to me through what they say, through how they interact with me, through what they do. And I won't be distracted by all the bells and whistles, right? Okay, I'll never forget this. I watched an episode of Oprah, and the topic was men and women, how we see each other. And a woman got up in the audience and said, she was talking to a man, and she said, and she was wearing a very tight-fitting sweater. She said, it's not fair. I want to be appreciated for my mind. I want to be appreciated for who I am as a person. And you shouldn't look at me as just a physical object. I should be appreciated, a common complaint you hear. I want to be appreciated for my mind. The man turned to her and said, if that's the case, why did you put that sweater on today? Okay, now he wasn't saying that she wasn't a wonderful person. He was saying, and he pointed this out, you decided to wear a tight sweater today. Why? You obviously wanted to present something other than your brain in this audience. So, and again, I'm not saying that he was 100% right in putting the burden on her, but the point is that we do dress. When we dress in a way that we want to bring attention to the external, that's what people will notice first. So the laws of modesty help us avoid that.
I always like to be that.
I can't hear.
Yeah. I always like to be that.
Go ahead.
Why not just wear burqas then?
Yeah, I'll get to that, but I'll answer your question.
Our eyes.
Yeah.
And we could paint our eyes all brown.
Right.
And then we wouldn't,
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
why not wear the burqa? Okay, so the answer is that we don't want to, that the laws are not meant to obscure our individuality. Okay, the burqa covers up who we are. The burqa, the head to toe thing, it's an invisible, you become invisible. The idea of tznius is not to be invisible, just the opposite, to allow our inner selves to shine. So, and plus the idea of covering the face is also something that relates to, it's an interesting, very interesting idea. The face is allowed to be uncovered because it says that, and I'm going to deal with this much later when I talk about women. We're going back to Chava, to how she was created. But the face was the only part of the body. Once they sinned, the face was the only part of the body that didn't lose its spiritual essence. In other words, you could look at a person, we say today, the eyes are the windows of the soul. We have that concept in Judaism as well, that the face is the last remnant of our soul that is able to shine through without impediment. Therefore, we don't need to cover it. Again, remember what was the purpose of covering the body? That all I'm going to see is the physical when I look at you. But the face retains that essence of spirituality of the soul. You can see who I am as an individual when you look at my face and in my eyes. It shines out more strongly. Therefore, we're not obligated to cover it.
Okay, but so what if we wore something that was just left our face exposed?
So again, I mean, we'll talk more about this when we get into the laws, but we're not obligated to hide ourselves like that, to hide our bodies. We're obligated to not expose them, to not expose them. So wearing regular clothing, not tight-fitting clothing that's going to cover my body in a semi-fashionable way is absolutely appropriate. Again, and it comes back to that thing that we talk about all the time. It's a difference between attractive and attracting. It is, and when we come to the laws of actual tznius, the laws of how to dress with tznius, it's a very difficult topic because very little of it is based on Torah mitzvos. Very little of it is based on what's in the Torah. It's mostly based on what's called dat Yehudis, the way of the Jewish woman, and it has to do with time and place. It has to do with wider social contexts. So it's much harder to define, and it's again more of this feeling of, this sense of this is appropriate, this is not appropriate. So we'll get to that later. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that's what Tznius does for us. It allows us to not look for approval on the basis of externals, and also not judge other people on the basis of externals, right? It sends a message: look below the surface to know who I really am. There's actually another interesting picture that I recently saw on Facebook. Someone sent this picture of, I'm reminded of, like, remember when the Obamas were first elected, when President Obama was first elected, there were lots of pictures of Michelle in sleeveless tops, and she had really buff arms, and all the media could talk about was her great arms. Her upper arms were in fabulous shape, in fabulous condition, and I think that's a very interesting phenomenon, because all they were talking about was how she looked in a physical way, and it's a shame. I'm sure she's a wonderful woman. I'm sure she had a large agenda to get to in terms of what she wanted to accomplish as First Lady. She had all these things that she could have, they could have been talking about with her agenda, what she was going to accomplish, how she differed from this First Lady, and all they could talk about was her upper arms. Now, I'm not saying that she was trying to flaunt them. I'm not saying she wasn't trying to flaunt them. She was dressing in a sleeveless top for a reason. She was proud of them. And that's fine. Being proud of how you keep yourself in good shape is great. But the result is that if you're presenting yourself in a physical way, people are going to judge you in the physical way. And so again, it's back to that idea that tznius is the opposite of objectification. Covering up the arms is a way of saying, don't look at my arms. Look at what I'm saying to you. Forget it. I have a nice body, but I'm not showing that to you. I don't want you to focus on that. I don't want you to dwell on that. It's not the part of me I want you to remember in 50 years. Does she really, does she want people to remember that, wow, the First Lady really had buff arms? I'm sure she doesn't. But now it's an obstacle that she has to get over because of the way she originally presented herself. So I think we're going to stop there for now. And any questions or further discussion on the topic? Okay.
Really good.
Okay, it was really fascinating stuff. Okay.